Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to our second day of the virtual symposium for sustainable financing for soil remediation. So my name is Joe Zhang. I'm from IISD. I'm really glad to be here with you today. So before we start, again, a quick housekeeping announcement, the same as yesterday, but just a kind reminder, we do have simultaneous translation for English and Chinese for this session, and you can find the interpretation button towards the bottom of your screen, the globe button there. And then again, the meeting is being recorded as yesterday's. We'll share the recordings and slides after the session on the event page. During the event, please make sure to use the chat box or Q&A function to ask any questions you would like to the panelists, and we will address them at the Q&A session towards the end. So for those of you who weren't able to join yesterday's session, our moderator, Ms. Liu Hongqiao, is going to give a recap of yesterday's session so you're not feeling missed out. And Ms. Liu, just a quick introduction. Ms. Liu is an award-winning journalist, an environment policy expert on matters regarding climate change and environment matters in China. So we're very glad to have Ms. Liu moderating the session for this virtual symposium. Hongqiao, please.
Thank you, Joe. So welcome everyone again to join our second session on this series discussion about soil remediation in China and beyond, focusing on sustainable finance. Yesterday, we focused on the governance perspective on soil remediation projects in China, and with experts from both China and the EU and the US to share with their practice and observations on this very important issue. We have talked about the science and policy gap. We talk about inadequate policies in China and beyond, and also experts shared about their concerns and difficulties in identifying the liabilities of the polluter who are supposed to pay for the cost, which lead to another question about on clear liability and how to distribute the funding and responsibilities. And a lot of the experts also share some of the innovations that have been taking place in China, in the EU and the US, such as polluters liability insurance, mobilizing green bond and green finance to finance the limited public budget dominated soil remediation projects in China and elsewhere. And here, I just want to emphasize one point that was made in yesterday's session, that prevention is really the key. Prevention. We don't have to treat the soil, which is super difficult, complicated, and very costly if we could prevent the contamination from happening. But again, today we are here to talk about the technical challenges and the challenges in industrialized soil remediation when contamination has already happened. We have the pleasure to invite some very high-level guests from both China and Norway. But before going to details, I'll pass the floor to Tor, sorry about the pronunciation, Torin Layson, Deputy Managing Director from NIVA, one of our co-organizer, to give some welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, dear participants and panelists, and dear Hongqiao. I'll give a brief introduction to today's session. And as you know, we have a 3-day virtual seminar on sustainable financing for soil remediation projects in China and beyond. And despite financing being the topic, the key topic, we will focus today's session on technical issues. And as Hong Xiao mentioned, tomorrow we will dive more into the challenges associated with the financing aspects in itself, after also having laid the ground regarding the policy aspects yesterday. Sustainable soil remediation requires extensive knowledge related to the local situation in the field, different contaminants and their behavior, the choice of technology. So a lot of very technical engineering, chemistry, hard natural science topics, but also we need to have knowledge about the nature, the biodiversity surrounding the contaminated sites, and also very important, the local communities impacted, both impacted by the current legacy situation and the future situation under a regime of some kind of remediation. So in addition to the financing issue, one of the biggest problems for the industry dealing with soil remediation and especially remediation of legacy contamination is capacity with sufficient expertise. This is very much the case in China, and it is therefore crucial for potential investors to have an opportunity to understand the whole process from the technical side, to minimize their concerns and understand the prospective benefits of measures they are going to undertake. There has been a gap in knowledge capacity to carry out the planned quite big remediation actions for contaminated sites, and especially the large, more remote legacy contaminated sites. So in today's program, we have invited several experts in the field that will share experiences and discuss issues faced by those who are implementing remediation and planning for new and innovative solutions that could be applied in the future. I also want to thank, first of all, colleagues from the IISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, that is arranging this seminar series together with my institute, the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, NIVA. Then the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Norwegian Embassy in Beijing for funding this event, which is part of a larger project on the issues related to financing, wind finance, and soil contamination. And also colleagues in the Chinese Academy of Environmental Planning, as well as the Ministry of Ecology and Environment in China. So with that, I hope you all will have a very interesting day. And I give the word back to moderator Hong Xiao. Thank you.
Thank you, Torin. So today in the presentation session, we will have 4 speakers, 2 from China, 2 from Norway, to share with us their technology approach and the application in soil remediation in China. Some of them are quite, I have to say, very, very impressive in the term of effectiveness and the fact that they could control and then manage the risk while balancing the cost, which is one of the biggest challenges in soil remediation all around the world. Just a little bit housekeeping too. For all speakers, you only have 6 minutes to present your ideas. You are free to use either English or Chinese. We have interpretation available for non-Chinese speakers. Just to make sure you click the interpretation button at the bottom bar of Zoom so you can receive the English translation. And vice versa for Chinese speakers who would like to listen to the presentation in Chinese. I will give a sign to the speakers when you only have 1 minute left. Please respect the time limitation and only give the high-level ideas of the cases. We will have more detailed discussion in the following session in moderated discussion. So Let me first introduce Dr. Wan Xiaoming from the Institute of Geographic Sciences and the Natural Resources Research of China Academy of Science. Dr. Wan Xiaoming is an associate researcher and the deputy director of the Resource Engineer and Environmental Remediation Research Laboratory at the Institute of Geographic Sciences and Resources at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Her main research interests are the migration and the transformation process of heavy metals in soil plant system and the remediation and sustainable use of strategies of contaminated soils. She will make a presentation on the field application of phytoremediation to arsenic contaminated land in China. Some very, very exciting technology and case studies that I myself have reported a few years ago when I was an investigative journalist in China. And without further ado, I will pass the floor to Dr. Wan. Wan博士，你有6分钟的演讲时间 please.
Hello. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can all see your screen.
Okay, that's great. Sorry. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce our recent works. Not recent, but like 10 or 20 years work on a field application of phytoremediation to arsenic contaminated land in China. And actually, I'm representing my team. It is comprised of about 20 persons in our team. It's called the environmental remediation team. Okay, I'm going to pass this very long name of our institute and directly go to my presentation. So there are several types of phytoremediation for soil pollution, and I think for these theories, I'm going to just pass these slides because Hongchao told me that I better focus on the cases. But if later you have some questions about it, we can discuss about it later. So this is a phyto extraction of arsenic from contaminated soil. That's a main technology we used here in China. So it's quite simple. It's like we plant the hyperaccumulators, which can take up a lot of arsenic, this toxic element from the soil. And then we can harvest the hyperaccumulator, the above ground parts, and then the arsenic is removed from the soil. So it's phyto extraction of arsenic from contaminated soil. And this is the main technology we use here because it's good to have small investment and landscape friendly. Phytobarrier, I think Professor Zhang will talk about this later, so I'm going to pass it. And this one is actually like the combination of the first two technologies. So we plant two plants at the same time. One is to remove contaminants from the soil. The other one is to prevent the heavy metals to enter in the food chain or like some other things. So the plant is what we use to produce clothes, and we can make that to clothes. This is the technical system for the phytoremediation. So we assess the pollution first and then make the plans and do the remediation. And after remediation, we assess again how we did it, if it's successful or not. And then we will also have an economic assessment to see if it fits for the requirement of the cost and the benefit. So for the phytoremediation of arsenic contaminated soil, it's not only in China, actually, it's in Germany. I think in Germany, there is a group who is also doing this research, and also in the USA. And I'm going to talk about the cases in China, of course. So this one is the first one. It's the first phytoremediation project of ours, of course, and also the international first phytoremediation project for arsenic contaminated soil. This one is contaminated by, I think it's by mining activities, and the mining activities polluted the river, and then the farmers use the water from the river to irrigate the farmland, and then the farmland got all barren, actually no crops can grow on it. So in 2002, we started this project and we planted this hyperaccumulator Phytoremediation to remove arsenic from soil. And actually the remediation efficiency is 8 to 12% per year. So this is a gradual decrease of the soil arsenic from 2002 to 2007. And this one is, the case 2 is special because it's the first enterprise paid arsenic phytoremediation project. As you know that in China, due to the specialized ownership, it's always the government to pay for it, but this one is the first enterprise paid. I think it's like an industrial park or something like that. So they produce lead and zinc mine. I don't know. It's a smelting plant. So I think it's about 35 hectares which were contaminated by arsenic and by lead. So we used this plant to remove arsenic and lead from soil. The case 3 is special because at that time it was the biggest phytoremediation project, and it's about 80 hectares. So we remediate this piece of land from 2011 to 2015. This land is contaminated because actually it's kind of natural reasons, because there is a big river, and in the upstream there is big mine tailings. I think there are a lot of tailings, and one year the rain is very heavy, so the dam is broken, and all those mine tailings were rushed into the farmland, and so that's why a lot of farmland was contaminated seriously. And it's not only the heavy metals, but also it's also it has very low pH values, so there is acidification. And we used the phyto extraction over there, and also we also added some amendments to it because it's acidic. We have to make it back to normal. And after 4-year remediation, so the land can go back to the agricultural use. So this is like a control. It's like a comparison of the land with and without remediation. We can see that for the land without remediation, it still cannot grow any plants. And this one is a more recent one, and the soil is contaminated by real gar mining. So in the left pictures, the left above one is the picture before remediation, and after the lower one is the current photo after remediation. And actually this one is the first soil remediation industry park in China. So it's not only we just plant some plants and remove it and clean the soil. We got some enterprises or companies over there. Some companies are doing the seedling of the hyperaccumulators, and some companies are doing the incineration work for us. So for the soil remediation industry park, it means there are some companies, and actually it can support itself. And this one is I want to talk about this one is because in the first 4 we only used terrace vitata, this hyperaccumulator, to clean the soil. And in this project, we used hyperaccumulators, and also we used some other plants. They can clean up the soil, and at the same time, they have some other economical value, like they can be medicine, and there are some beautiful flowers that have some other value for it. And so the above typical cases have actually some typical cases, and we actually have about 20 different projects. And as you know, because the economy and the policy and everything, so now we have to consider not only how to clean up the soil, but also can it bring us some benefits, and how to decrease the cost. So now our rule is like we have to consider the local agricultural characteristics. Like we can't see, we have to ask them to remove all the other plants they have already planted, even it's not safe, because they may not buy it. So we have to combine our technology to their local agricultural patterns, like ornamental plants breeding. And so we have to ensure both the safety and their income to be high enough for them. So I think to be further improved, I proposed 4 parts. First one is the regionalization, because currently to clean up the soil is not just from the environmental aspect. We have to consider the whole region, like what's their plans later and what the soil is going to produce in the future and all the other things. And another one is standardization, because phyto extraction relies a lot on the plant itself. So it's actually kind of hard to make it to be really standardized. And the third one is in mechanization, because currently, as you know, the human power is becoming more and more expensive. So we have to rely on mechanization to lower our cost. And the final one is the waste reutilization. Actually, that's one of my projects currently I'm doing. So we want, because a lot of people will ask me, what are you going to do with the harvested hyperaccumulated biomass? So currently I'm trying to transform this waste, arsenic-enriched waste, to kind of resource that can be useful and can make some money, and which can kind of offset the whole cost of the phyto extraction technology.
Thank you, Professor Wan. You're a little bit over time, and as I said, I wanted to interrupt you, but what you said was too fascinating. So I kind of let you talk a little bit more. But I will try to keep our followers, the speakers afterwards, to just please keep in time. And I will give you a sign. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'm going to give you a sign of when you only have 1 minute left. Okay. But again, thank you, Dr. Wan. We will discuss more of the issues you just raised out in the moderated discussion, and as my colleague Igor just typed it in the chat box to everyone, the Q&A session is open. Please, if you have any questions, remarks, intervention in regard of our speaker's presentation, please don't hesitate to leave a comment there, and we will address your questions in the later part of the seminar. And right now, I'm going to pass the floor to Professor Zhang Hua. Zhang Hua is a distinguished co-researcher of the Chinese Academy of Science and the Deputy Director of the State Key Laboratory of Environmental Geochemistry and the Director of Guizhou Engineering and Technology Research Center for the Prevention and the Control of Soil Heavy Metal Pollution in China. His main research direction is environmental health, diagnosis, and remediation. And today, Professor Zhang will share with us his thoughts and observations on the sustainable remediation of mercury contaminated farmland, another type of heavy metal polluted land that is very common in China. So Professor Zhang, you have the floor, and try to keep your presentation short and brief, and I will give you a sign when you only have 1 minute left. Thank you.
好的，谢谢虹桥。
Thank you, Hong Qiao. It's my great honor to be here. I'm from the Institute of Geochemistry, Chinese Academy of Sciences. I'm Zhang Hua. I'm going to share with you some of my personal observations on sustainable remediation of mercury contaminated farmland soil. As you know, soil contamination remediation is a systematic project. It involves a series of elements such as technology. Technology is today's main topic, but in fact, in addition to technology, it also involves economy and management and different departments such as environment, economy, and enterprises. The local general public is very concerned about the soil remediation, and they are highly interested in soil remediation. And of course, the ultimate goal of soil remediation is to protect the life health of human beings. Why is remediation of contaminated soil is so important? why do I want to focus on mercury contaminated soil remediation? In fact, remediation of soil mercury pollution is a global problem and a challenge. And site soil remediation is also one of the concerns of the International Mercury Convention. We should not only think about soil itself, we have to think about the holistic solutions. We have to think about soil, water, and gas or the air in a comprehensive manner. So this issue is really complicated. Why should we mention farmland specifically? And how to understand sustainable restoration and what issues should we pay special attention to? Unlike this site soil, the commercial value of farmland soil is very low. The site soil is more valuable than the farmland soil. The potential polluted area of cultivated land far exceeds the polluted site area, which directly affects the quality and safety of our agricultural products. And of course, there is a lot of impact on the safety and quality of agricultural products. The polluted farmland is mainly distributed in the underdeveloped countries or regions. The government has only limited financial resources to invest into the farmland soil remediation. How to realize large-scale, low-cost, and sustainable farmland soil remediation? As you know, the farmland contaminated may cover a large area and it is very costly. So we wonder whether there is a highly practical and replicable and a scalable model or experience in the farmland soil remediation. In 2016, I went back from Geneva to China, and we have been choosing those low mercury, low cadmium, and low arsenic accumulation, high economic value agriculture crops, and we try to incorporate them into a positive crop list featured by low mercury accumulation and the low arsenic accumulation. And based upon that principle, we have put forward a technical mode of agronomic regulation plus X, which is easily understandable even for the less educated general public. And we can follow this workflow. I'm sorry, this workflow is in Chinese. And based upon this model, we can make use of some financial instruments, such as the countryside tourism and healthcare education and other industrial chains to develop some innovative industrial chain and to fund those projects. In this process, a lot of companies have approached us and they wanted to get involved in the projects. They want to eradicate the contaminants, and they wonder whether we have some products or technologies available to help them completely eradicate those contaminants. In one of our projects, we found that selenium is a natural killer of mercury pollution exposure. The existence or appropriate addition of selenium can not only effectively reduce the mercury accumulation in rice, but also reduces the risk of human exposure to mercury. Selenium can inhibit the enrichment of mercury in rice, and there is the interaction between the roots and the soil and the air. In addition to mercury, selenium also has an antagonistic mechanism against the cadmium and arsenic in rice. So based upon these research findings, we have developed a series of cost-effective trappers and conditioners, including the leaf conditioner and the soil conditioner. The combustion of straws pollutes the air. So we have studied the safe disposal of straw and has converted straw into a kind of resource that can be utilized, and it has formed a closed loop which can reduce our cost. And we found that there is reduction of mercury, arsenic in the fruits, and the fruits and other agriculture products have rich selenium, resulting in greater quality of those products. And this creates more revenues for the farmers. We want to explore the measures to reduce the cost. So we explored the 3 steps of zero cost risk control for pure agronomic regulation. So we use the low contaminant accumulation variety with high economic value. In those heavy metal contaminated soil, according to the national control measures, the crops shall not be planted, but now with our measures, those contaminated soil can still grow crops, and the crops and agriculture products meet the national standards. And there is the precise poverty alleviation strategy of China, and there is also the strategy of countryside revitalization. So what we do is totally aligned with national strategies. It can increase the income of local farmers and also make the soil safer. And here we can see the pictures. We not only try to eliminate and reduce heavy metal in healthy soil, we want to enrich the minerals. So with our measures, the agriculture products have rich selenium, which means higher quality of those agriculture products. Let's look at the prospects of the research on farmland soil. Of course, we have to take risk control and safe utilization of contaminated soil as the core. And we take low accumulation, high value agronomic regulation as the main measure. And of course, we have to meet the national safety standard for agriculture products. We have to stress quality and safety of agriculture products, and we develop rapid monitoring and technology to guarantee the quality and safety of agriculture products. I spent a lot of time developing the rapid monitoring and inspection technology for the ambient contaminants and pollutants. Thank you very much.
Presentation, and again, very inspiring to see some very functional technologies being put in place in China. And I would just, again, we start to see questions raised in the Q&A session. Please keep them coming while our panelists give their presentation. And right now I'm going to introduce Professor Nikolai Freiberg, who is a research director of a biodiversity program in the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. Welcome, Professor Nikolai Freiberg. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Copenhagen and a visiting scientist at the University of Leeds in the UK. His background is in freshwater ecology and has more than 30 years of experience in research into impacts of human perturbation on aquatic ecosystems. So today he's going to give us a cutting-edge approach, share with us a cutting-edge approach on using nature-based restoration solutions to deal with soil remediation. And Professor Friberg, the floor is yours. And please also try to keep your speech short, and I will give you a sign when you have only 1 minute left. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hongcha. Thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to this very interesting session. First of all, I'm not a soil scientist, as I said, so what I will be sharing with you is my experience from working in freshwater ecosystems. I think it's readily applicable, and I have only 2 slides, so I hope I will be in time. I'll just see if we can get this up in presentation mode. Yeah, I think it's there. So what I will introduce to you is the use of nature-based solutions. Actually, the first talks that we have had have also used nature as an element for soil remediation. And so my angle here is from the experience that we've done looking at the transition between freshwater ecosystems and terrestrial ecosystems, we've seen that a really important issue is the multifunctionality. That what you do with a nature-based solution is that you use parts of nature to do the job that are technology only. It's not that nature-based solutions are without technology or technological solutions, but they try to mimic nature. And in that way, you get more benefits than just focusing on a single issue. So this case was in an urban area, Oslo, our hometown of NIVA, where we looked at having what is called riparian zone, that is vegetated zones along the rivers for water quality, for biological or biodiversity, fish production, and also other ecosystem services related to reduction of toxins, but also human well-being in terms of providing nice areas for people to be in. And what we found was that they do indeed point to a lot of these directions. You'd see higher degrees of denitrification. We saw there was higher fish production, and we saw a reduction in temperature, which is also beneficial for both the river, but also for people being there. The alternative is the open landscape, but this is where we would have more impacts of heat. Another issue here is that these have a lot of localized benefits, but in a new project we just started on nature-based solutions, we will try and see how can we optimize the use of these nature-based solutions on larger scales, also alluding to some we heard in the earlier talks. So if you look at a catchment where a river gets its water from, there would be areas where you have high risk of pollution in this case, or you would have a large scale climate change impacts. And there you could put in your nature-based solutions and have an overall large benefit. We heard the example early on that there was flooding from contaminated sediments on farmland downstream. And if you have a nature-based solution there that might prevent the flooding, the contaminated sediment to enter the agricultural area, then you would have a great additional benefit, in addition to maybe having increased local biodiversity, reduced nutrient emission to the river itself. So the other thing here is what I've started talking about is that when we look at nature-based solutions, and sorry again, this is based on fresh waters, but it's easily transferable to soil. You have solutions which targeting one thing. That would be a surface water solution, reducing the input of toxins. There you try to prevent and manage a problem, but you still use nature. Then you go up a scale, you try to rehabilitate an ecosystem or parts of an ecosystem, and you can't really do it because it's impacted, so you try to create and mimic nature. But that two parts will always need that you have some maintenance in place to make sure that they function as they should. and prevent any issues you have. On the right side, you have where you actually restore ecosystems. So you restore systems that are more complex, and you do recreate or improve something that have been damaged before. But the whole idea is that nature itself will do the job in time, and you would not need to do any interventions after you sort of kickstart the rehabilitation. And of course, in the end, you have natural ecosystems. If we look at the storage of carbon, we know that natural wetlands store a lot of carbon. We know in the sea that seaweed beds and mangrove forests store a lot of carbon. And this is what we also heard from yesterday. This is preventing deterioration of natural ecosystems because they provide us with a range of services. So rather than break them down and then try and rebuild them under a large cost, we should try and prevent systems that have key functions to the way we live and have benefits for the impact that we will have as human beings, because it's quite unlikely or impossible, I would say, that we will not have negative impacts on nature when we are so many people. So this is all about the trade-off. And I think this is all I will introduce at this point of time. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pepberg. You're very sharp and you respect the time. It's exact 6 minutes, including the time speaking now. You raised a few very important points. For example, some of the technologies, for example, in the water ecosystem, can be applied into soil remediation, which kind of opens up the perspective, the scope of what we're talking about, the mutual learning between different ecosystems, and also mobilize the nature to make nature work for us. We will have more discussion later in the moderated discussion. And right now, I will just pass the floor to Anne Peterson, who will share with us an equally exciting approach to solving contaminated soil by transforming waste timber into a sustainable solvent. Anne Peterson holds a master degree of science in marine chemistry and a bachelor degree of science in analytical chemistry from the University of Oslo. He's now the lead of the section environmental chemistry at the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute, NGI, and also the head of its environmental laboratory. Anne Peterson specialized in marine sediment and polluted soil, especially related to site characterization, risk evaluation, traditional remediation, and the use of remedial methods to reduce environmental risk in cost-effective and sustainable manners. I think that's two of the keywords that we're going to discuss later in the discussion and the Q&A. Now I will just pass the floor to you. Thank you. You can start, please.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And my my talk will show how we can take a huge benefit of the circular economy and use that into the remediation of soils. And also, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge my two colleagues and experts in this field, that is Erlend Sørmo and Gerard Cornelis. Next slide, please. Waste timber, that is the raw material that is a waste fraction, that is a problem, and it's a huge amount of it. In Norway only, it's produced some 750,000 tons a year, and it can be all sorts of origin of this. I mean, wooden beams, paneling, flooring, furniture, etc., etc. And this wood isn't totally clean. It contains paint residues and binders and metals into it. So it's a problem that is the beginning of our solution. Next slide, please. And the technology here presented here is the pyrolysis of this timber. Most of this is already published from our side, so it's available. There is no licenses or patents associated with this technology, so it's easy to have access to it. But basically, when the principle of it is that we can heat the organic matter in an oxygen-free environment and then produce biochar. That's the key of it. And the biochar, it is extremely stable when added to the soil, so it will not degrade in hundreds or even thousands of years. Next slide, please. And the biochar is an adsorbent. So this is the key of the technology. That is the function of it. It's adsorbent, and it will absorb contaminants to it. And I mean, that's basically what we want to get control of in the contaminated soil. And already today, sorbents like this is in wide use. It can be for water purification, wastewater treatments, etc. Next slide, please. And when we are producing the biochar, it's always important to keep an eye on the downside of it. Is there what will happen to all the contaminants, the paint residues and all that already in the woods, and what will happen during the pyrolysis when it is produced biochar into all the emission gases. And the short story of that is, if we go to the next slide, is that the organic contaminants, they are basically destroyed in the high temperature. The heavy metals that we find, they will actually not leach out. They will stay in this binder, in this biochar. And we also see that the gases from the pyrolysis process itself is okay. It's not a huge problem. It's manageable. So actually, to convert this waste fraction of timber into this extremely efficient product of biochar, that is a process that is environmental friendly. And I mentioned circular economy. When the society have start with a huge waste problem like the timber, there is a willingness to pay to get rid of it. So that is the first step in the economic chain. And the other one is also that we can take benefit from the heat during the pyrolysis. We know how the energy prices in Norway and Europe is in these days. So that's a positive one. And then, of course, we have the biochar itself now. That is a product. And if you go to the next slide, we can see more details on how this biochar product is actually working. And basically, what we can see is that if we add few percentages to the contaminated soil, and let's say in this example here, it is contaminated with PFAS or some other organic contaminants. When they are mixed together, the biochar will bind the PFAS extremely efficient, up to 99% is bound and is stop leaching. And that means that the environmental risk is decreased to low level and is acceptable. Next slide, please. And also on these main findings, we can see that there is some differences to the amount of organic carbon we have in the soil has to be taken into consideration. The effect of it, but the effect is extremely high, especially in soils with low organic carbon. And also the degree of activation will have an effect to it. Next slide, please. And that is the end of it. So basically, instead of excavating contaminated soil, bringing the contaminated soil by transport to a deposit facility, it's only step after step with extremely expensive handling of it. We can see by using this type of technology that is and circular economy, positive economical benefits can actually be added to this process instead, and giving an extremely good environmental effect to it. Yes, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anna Peterson, for your excellent presentation. And again, as I just mentioned, my colleague just mentioned, the Q&A session is open, and we are eager to hear from you on your questions. And if I may to just recap what I've heard, what I've learned from the presentations above, is that there's an emergent trend of relying on nature-based solutions to repair and remediate soil and other ecosystems. And here our panelists have shared with us cases on, for example, using different plants, waste timber, etc. While previously, when I started covering the issue 10 years ago, I heard a lot discussion more, using physical and chemical process to achieve such goal. And of course, relating to that, we have cost issues, we have short time spent, etc. I'm not sure this is a coincidence of our selection or is really an emerging trend that is happening in the field. And if I may, I'll before passing to our panelists with a few questions. And another thing that strikes me is the point made by Professor Zhang Hua about risk control. And we are facing a world with multiple challenges, not just a soil, contaminated soil. We are dealing with a complex world with multiple SDGs flying around. We have food security issues, we have human health, we have biodiversity, we have climate challenge to deal with, we have water and the marine ecosystem that are all interlinked with soil. And we are also, I think, before let's say 10 years ago, when I started to cover this, the discussion was solely concentrated on how to repair and remediate the soil so we can continue to grow crops or build infrastructures. But today we're more looking for co-benefits and the co-challenges instead of just focusing on solving that one single problem. I'm not sure that impression is accurate, but that's definitely what I've heard and my reflection from the panelists. And another very striking point, not striking, but impressive and a sparkling point that come out from the discussion is the multifunctionality that Professor Nikolai Freiberg just mentioned about, using nature to work for us. And again, what Dr. Wan mentioned about mobilizing the local community and the multiple stakeholders to participate in the program instead of just stepping into the field and establish some projects. So with that, I will just start posing questions to our panelists. Do you see that? Do you agree with what I just recapped about this emerging trend of relying on nature-based solutions to solve the problem? Please challenge me if I get it wrong, if I get it wrong and a biased impression. Should we start from, let's say, from Anna Peterson? You just completed your speech. You still have the floor.
Yes, I think one important starting point when it comes to nature-based solutions or other more kind of novel approaches is that we also need to have a bit of a change in the opinion of people what pollution actually is, because it can be that people or authorities think as cleaning things up means removing the pollution totally from the area, but instead thinking that the negative risk of it is taken care of. So kind of the metals or the organic contaminants might still be on the site, but they are immobilized. So the actual environmental risk is what we are achieving. And that is a bit more complicated way to communicate how we solve the problem, but nevertheless, I think that's important also to take into consideration when choosing these methods.
Thank you. Professor Nicola Freiberg, do you want to comment on that?
Yes. First of all, I think your recap was perfect. I think it's true that we do see the use of much more natural solutions. And I think it is very much because traditional solutions have failed to a large extent. So not always failed, but in the long run, it's like an arms race. You need to keep on doing things actively to get what you want. And often you only solve one issue, as we also addressed, and not all, as you really to the point said, that all these combined issues that we are faced now as humans needs to be tackled at one time, actually, because we don't really have the necessary time to take it in as a single issue, one at a time. So I think this is very correct on the way it's moving forward, but it's also have a lot of challenges, not least, as Arne was also saying, that you need to have this public perception or perception also within the scientific community that this approach is actually, although it's a bit untidy and you maybe still leave pollutants out there, or you use natural processes, which not necessarily looks very looks sort of very tidy in any way, that these can actually do the job. I think it's you can see the way that people do cut their grass, and they don't leave any flowers for the pollinators, because this has been the tradition. So this is a paradigm shift in many ways, and it's all parts of society. It's not only us as scientists. It's really deep in society, ingrained how we tackle issues like pollution, issues with climate change. Normally we build our way out or removed our way out of the problems, and now we're suggesting something else, which is not that easy to grasp, I think, for a lot of people. And this is the barrier at the moment.
Thank you. I would turn to Dr. Wan and Professor Zhang Hua, and I will express myself in Chinese. 张华教授，您对这个问题有什么看法
So
吗？
Professor Zhang Hua, what is your viewpoint on this? So Ms. Wan and you share some examples about using plants. So these are phytoremediation. This is also could be considered as a nature-based solutions. So how do you look at the use of plants or nature to remediate vis-a-vis the chemical and the physical approach? What is the future prospect and the challenges in that? Professor Zhang, please. Okay, thank you, moderator. And so if I speak too much, then please interrupt me. And indeed, this is a very big and grand topic. Personally, well, 10 years ago, when I worked in Norway, I started to think about the soil issues in China and also in the world. How can we have sustainable remediation of the soil? And I discovered that many scientists around me focused their energy on the end of pipe treatment. So at that time, I was pretty sober, and I believe that the soil remediation, as I said just now, first, we need to understand where these heavy metals come from. And so this is related to the scientific system and scientific structure. We need to understand the crust and also the rocks. So there could be these rocks that would turn into a soil, and after weathering. And so we have a lot of assumptions. Before the mankind appeared, when there's no anthropogenic effect or impact in our soil, actually rocks will be weathered, and there were actually some heavy metals accumulation, and there were migration of and transformation of these heavy metals. So heavy metals actually are the particulate matters coming from the crust of our earth, and they have been there. And under the human activities impact, human beings wanted to survive and wanted to have a better lifestyle. And so the earth could not meet our need for the very good grain. So we put fertilizers, chemical fertilizers into the soil, and we started to do the mining. So these anthropogenic activities have inevitably caused accumulation of heavy metals in the soil, and that includes the contaminated sites near the human settlement, or even forest in the nature, or some of the sites. So in this process, what we need to really focus on, I would like to emphasize, so if there are some very high level of heavy metals in the geological background, well, in some of the remote areas in China, we found that in local areas, they have not got any anthropogenic activities or industrial activities or mining. However, through our research, we found that in their natural soil, they already have very high level of heavy metals, which exceeds the soil standard of China and EU. So these soil cannot be defined as contaminated soil. I think they are just soil that is breaching the standards. And these heavy metals come from the geological background. So maybe millions of tens of millions of hectares might be like this. Well, in some low temperature area in the world, many countries have these soil with very high base level. So Professor Zhang, maybe I can interrupt a little bit. So you mentioned 2 points. One is that we need to restore the remediated site, the contaminated site, but we also need to really look at those sites that has already some natural background level of heavy metals. So in this context, how do you see the nature-based solution, for example, using plants to absorb, and also Ms. Wan talk about using these plants to really absorb and extract those heavy metals. What is your thinking about that? Well, in terms of the cost and benefit, is the nature-based solution the best way to go? I understand.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. In that process, I think we have to stress risk control. For nature-based solutions and artificial solutions, I think the key is risk control. And of course, we want to create a better environment for people. If there is a mine in a very remote area and there is a severe contamination there, but there are no people living there, then of course, we won't give a top priority to contamination, to the remediation of those contaminated areas. It won't be realistic for us to invest millions of yuan into the soil remediation in those remote areas where there are not so many people. So we have to identify the priority areas. We have to protect areas where there are a lot of human activities, and we have to identify the nature of those land, whether it is commercial land or agricultural land. So we have to clarify those contaminated land. So it is a kind of a game theory. We should have a systematic management and philosophies. Risk control should come first. I can give you an example. USA and Japan and China have invested heavily into explorations, and there are successful cases and there are some failed cases. In fact, it is a simple issue of math. For example, for 1 mu of farmland in certain projects, and the remediation cost per mu of land can reach 100,000 to 200,000 yuan. And for the farmers, if they work for the whole year, their income per mu is only 800 to 1,000 yuan, and if the remediation cost per mu is over 100,000 to 200,000 yuan, that's too expensive. You can do the math about input and output. We can relocate those people into the non-contaminated areas. As you know, China has very valuable land. Land is precious in China. Of course, we cannot simply relocate those people to other areas. Then we can plant some plants and flowers. We can build local landscape. It is hard for some heavy metals to migrate into those plants, and those plants and flowers have ornamental value. And we have the case of rape flower tourism. You can attract tourists to those areas where plants and flowers are planted, and the local soil quality can also be improved. And we can recover some minerals, and the minerals can go back into the soil to enrich the nutrient content. But of course, the prerequisite is risk control. We have to appreciate the value of the land and guarantee the income of local people. We don't want local people to see decreased income. We want their income to increase.
You made some very interesting point, and I would say actually not interesting, but very powerful point about sometimes we have to repurpose the land, and we need to balance what we need to manage our expectation depending on the cost and all the limitations we have to deal with the land in front of us. And I just want to move this question to Dr. Wan, Dr. Wan Xiaomin, who just rejoined us. 万老师，我们刚刚在讨论的是说，就是基于自然。
Hello, I'm Professor Wan. Just now we talked about nature-based solutions in comparison with physical and chemical solutions. We discussed the strength and advantages of nature-based solutions. In China, should we adopt physical or chemical solutions? Are those physical and chemical solutions for soil remediation realistic or unrealistic?
Sorry, I think there is still a technical problem with Professor Wan.
Let's
万老师，
give
那个抱歉，我打扰一下，那个万老师那边刚刚我从聊天
Sorry. From the chat box, I see that the internet connectivity of Mr. Wan is not so good. The internet connection is not stable, and I can take the floor.
Okay, please go ahead.
好的，就是
Okay. My personal opinion. I'm not here representing Mr. Wan. It's just my personal opinion. I think basically the physical and the chemical solutions can play a certain role in site remediation, but we are talking about farmland. We have to think about the cost. If a shopping mall or an office building is to be developed, the cost might be very high, and the physical and chemical remediation approaches and methods are also widely utilized in reality. So that's my personal opinion. Mr. Wan, are you back? He's not back yet. I have 20 seconds left. We have several cases of contaminated sites. And of course, the purpose of remediation must be based upon the functional plans of those contaminated lands. There is a chemical plant in Guizhou. And with remediation, we can turn that site into a sports field. People can run there. And the surface water can meet the national standard. So we can simply utilize the physical method, the barrier method, to prevent the contaminants from migrating into the groundwater. We finally invested 130 million yuan and turned the land into the construction land. We built a very beautiful apartment building.
And Peterson, you can speak. You can mute yourself.
I think you are muted, Mr. Peterson.
Yep. Back online now. Now, I think one very important aspect is that since the project will be so different in size, in what is available of money, they should be scalable. And what we see that is quite interesting when it comes to the biochar is that we can, in the case of, for instance, having poor farmers that need something to be done, they can, just by taking advantage in their own kind of waste wood and maybe also some wastes type of products from their production, that can be by relatively simple local kiln that they can build themselves. The biochar can be produced on the spot. So that means this can be produced for a very low money, and you can then kind of start treating a part of your soil, and that can be kind of a stepwise approach to it. Year by year, some more biochar is produced. And there is also the interesting side of carbon dioxide into this, because since the biochar is stable for hundreds and thousands of years, you can actually say that this will remove the carbon from the atmosphere. So in principle, that farmer can also be paid for absorbing CO2 as a climate benefit. So there are to find solutions that have several economical positive sides to it is quite important. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I actually wanted to ask you this question about carbon sinks, carbon stored in a healthy soil. Do you see this as an emerging, let's say, a potential funding for soil remediation in the future? And if so, what mechanisms have you seen? Let's say, if you could share us a little more on that point.
Yeah, I think it's important that there is several economical possibilities here. As mentioned further, since we're starting with waste products, that is a source of income to take a handout to get that waste material brought to you. So that is the first step of economy, instead of like what is done in water purification. You buy extremely expensive active carbon based on mineral charcoal. You start with getting paid for someone bringing you your that waste wood or whatever, and then you can use either quite relatively sophisticated pyrolysis technology, but it can also be done in simpler manner. So the investment doesn't have to be too huge, and it can be scaled. So we can also start with low production. You don't have to invest in a huge facility. And I think this scalability and this diversity in when it comes to the financial side to it is a benefit, because then you can tailor make a solution that actually will work in your case. And we have seen it earlier in typical Western projects that technologies brought to solve a problem in some other country, and you can see that the scale is just totally off. The technology is maybe too complicated in that case. The need for investment is too high. The need for maintenance is kind of too wide, etc. So scalability, that's a keyword here.
Thank you. And I just want to turn this question to Professor Nikolai Freiberg. You also make the point about nature-based solutions, and I think I actually see a question from the Q&A box about, with nature-based solutions, we may be able to improve soil productivity, but not according to accepted standards. The question comes from Sam Leeson, and my question is kind of complementary to that. When you mention, a paradigm shift using nature-based solutions and the funding mechanism, co-benefits, etc., but does it also come with a compromised standard? Does it mean we have to compromise the expectation if we turn to nature, given its low cost, the lower cost, and the potential, opportunity of scaling up, but does it mean we have to compromise our standards, compromise our expectation on safety, on security, and everything else? Please go ahead and challenge me on that point.
I think in an ideal world, of course, we shouldn't, but I think given the number of challenges, I would say that it's very difficult with having actually very low or little technology to maybe meet a lot of these standards. So in some ways it needs to be reconsidered, and that's of course also related to if there's any direct adverse impacts, then it cannot be a solution. But if you sort of bring it out of harm's way, so no one would really, it's very unlikely that it would have any negative impact, even though it might not be below a given standard. I think you can do it. I also, when we talk about nature-based solutions, I think it's not like two different worlds to the technology. I think we will see within the next decade that there will be emerging about sort of more traditional ways, technology and the use of nature to actually give what you want to a large degree, which you also heard today, but maybe building it in more complex systems. And also I like what Arne was saying about the scalability, because this is the same issue here. You want to have your solutions where they have maximum impact and benefits, and that would not be random. That would need to be in areas where you have several challenges meeting, and where you also have sort of in this case, as from your question, where you won't have a high risk of maybe exceeding the standards that you have, because if it's a toxin, it will not be mobilized. So in that way, that's a trade-off where you can still capture a lot of carbon, like transferring farmland that cannot really be used. You can maybe transfer to the original state, which would often in many ways have been a wetland, a large wetland that has been drained for farming purposes for some reason or another. You can't really do that anymore. You can put it there, and then of course you need to compensate the farmers. I see this very important, but you can have something where you would not really utilize it for food production, but you would utilize it as something that is more, have another benefit that has also a price, and that would be carbon storage. In wetlands, as an example, would have these co-benefits for biodiversity and other things. And after some time, I mean, the issues might get to a state where they actually will meet the standards, but not from day one, because this is a big change about nature-based solutions to more technical solutions, is that you need to be a bit patient, as natural processes take some time to do their job, and you can't do it instantly. And this, of course, will depend on the use. I mean, it will not be usable everywhere, but it will be useful, I think, in many places if it's used in a way that it's not sort of something you're just doing in connection with every issue you have, but you use it where it has a maximum impact and where you have the space as well, and maybe also the time for it to develop. So it's so it should be a tool among others.
I have a quick follow-up question on that about the cost of nature-based solutions. We've heard so many discussions about it at least in climate change, in climate adaptation and mitigation. So when it comes to salt, we've seen 4 cases, at least 4 technologies applied to soil remediation using sort of nature, relying on nature solutions, using the plants, flowers, etc. Is there any factor that particular factors, one or many factors that determine the cost of nature-based solutions that make it necessarily cheaper or expensive? Or is this a general, I personally have this general perception that the nature-based solution is cheaper. Is that really the case? And this question is not just for you, but also for our other panelists. But you can start, please.
Yeah, I can say that I also, from my experience, nature-based solutions will be cheaper in their direct cost. I mean, they are cheaper to make, but the indirect cost, the cost of the land you lose for building tower blocks, having agriculture, that's very high. So because they will often take up more space than a traditional solution. So giving this, I mean, overall, that's where there's a potential conflict, I think, in the introduction of nature-based solution at larger scales or in more frequently, is because they have this high indirect cost. Again, this needs to be addressed in a more holistic manner, so that this is another reason, place the nature-based solutions where they have most benefits, but also have less indirect costs, or as low as you can go. And the new project we just started in agricultural areas look exactly on this. So where do you find areas where you have a good potential for biodiversity, where you have climate change impacts in terms of flooding or drought, and where you also have a land use that might already be compromised by the climate change effects, so frequent flooding or drought, so they can't really be used very efficiently. Their value to society is not as high, but installing your nature-based solution there, you would maximize on your other benefits. And this is a sweet spot, or this is where you want to have your nature-based solutions. And if you use the principles like this, I think the economy overall would be very good, but you need to look at it on a large scale and not on a project by project scale, because then often I think the indirect cost of land will be in conflict with the necessary size of your nature-based solution if you want to achieve the certain goals.
And I will turn to Mr. Peterson. You have something to add.
Friberg, you have a really important point there about the nature-based solutions and the way they need the area, and that means that all in all, these various methods we have been talking about so far, even if it's biochar, if it's nature-based, if it's phytoremediation, they are not competing with each other basically. These are all kind of in the same tool of tools from the same palette. I mean, if we have in the center of an urban area a highly contaminated spot, well, then you basically your best solution is to excavate it in traditional manner. But then all depending on the case, the amount of square meters or cubic meters involved and the degree of contamination, you can start to choose from various types of tools, and you can also combine your different tools so we can have a tailor-made solution. So it's quite important not to have the focus on only trying to find the best solution, but to have the total overview so we can choose the best solutions to your case. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And as promised, we were going to answer some questions from the audience, from the attendees. Dr. Wan is back with us, but due to technical challenges, she will speak via a phone connection. I have to apologize on their behalf, on the behalf of the organizers. The voice from Dr. Wan might be not that clear, but we'll try to make it work. So here actually we have a very interesting and very interesting question, a very particular question addressed to Dr. Wan. From Sam Linson again, and she wanted to follow up with Dr. Wan if their research, their projects have been following the microbial biodiversity throughout the entire remediation process, or just the first few years when she showed 12% efficiency per year after 5 years. But I mean, after 5 years, there's still half of arsenic pollution left in the soil. Dr. Wan, do you want to do you understand the question, or have you seen the question? Do you want to respond, please? Yes, so we can. I can hear you. I'm not sure about the audience, but I think it's fine. You go.
好的，那我就通过电话这么说吧。刚刚的问题我看到了，这个植物修复呢。
So the interpreter finds it very low, but I'll try our best. In terms of the phytoremediation, the arsenic can be reduced in the soil, and definitely it can also increase the biodiversity in the soil. So soil can be restored to what it was before. But does it really sequester the carbon? No, these plants do not sequester carbon. It actually consumes carbon and also phosphate, just like other plants. But it really facilitates, it can promote the development of microorganisms. So I don't know if that answers your question.
We can also open the floor to Sam Linson if you want to follow up with that question. But just let us know. And at the same time, I will raise the question on behalf of Iskandar Abdullah. I try my best to pronounce everybody's name correctly, but excuse me if I didn't do it correctly. So there's a question on land rehabilitation, and I suppose it's addressed to Professor Zhang, but I'm not sure. Land rehabilitation is a long-term process, and for some time, land must be emptied with no production or use. How to handle this problem in developing countries where land is a key production asset? And for me, this is really a very nice question, and it's not just for developing countries in general, but also for China in the Chinese context, because we do have a red line, a bottom line drawn on basic agricultural lands. And what happened in China is that some of these basic agricultural lands are also contaminated in the past few years, in the past decades of economic development. And I will just turn this question to Professor Zhang Hua and later to Dr. Wan if she has something to add. Professor Zhang, please. Just try to keep your answer short and brief. Thank you.
收到，谢谢。那个
Okay, got it. And for the former question, I already input answers in online, and let me just briefly say, actually our soil standards have been developed many years ago, and the general context is that we only thought about the total volume of the heavy metals. So in many areas.
I just interrupt. Yeah, I can hear you clearly. I just want to interrupt you and brief the audience. Professor Zhang is answering another question, not the one I just posed, but another question posed in the Q&A session about nature-based solutions and the standards, whether there is or is not standards, or whether there will be a compromised standard when it comes to nature-based solution. Professor Zhang, you can go ahead.
好的，就是相当于
Okay, so for different countries, for the same contaminant, for example, cadmium, different countries have very different standards. And the reason is that when these countries developed their standards, they actually took into account different factors. So I think this is coming back to the definition of soil protection and the soil functions. In some areas, maybe they have more excessive heavy metals, but the crops do not have excessive heavy metals. But in other cases, the soil actually does not have excessive heavy metals, but the crops they plant have excessive heavy metals. So I think we have to look at the forms of these so-called bioavailable carbon, bioavailable carbon. And so this is something that we need to think about. And also in the soil standards, we also need to really think about the safety, security, and the security of the crops and also the soil. So this is a multinational system that would take into different factors. And then there's another question, I also saw it online, for some developing countries, well, we have a limited land resources. Therefore, you have to stop farming if you do the remediation. For example, we have some period of fallowing, and but actually when the land and the soil does not have the fertility, we would stop farming. We would have fallowing, and for this area, we can plant some fungus or mushrooms. And you know that these are fungus and mushrooms, they don't need soil. They actually make use of the air and some plants. So we can plant some, black fungus or mushrooms. And, the price of these products are also quite high. So in some developing countries, it is a very straightforward solution. So this is to respond to what you said, when the land and soil cannot be farmed during a fallowing period. Thank you. That's it. Dr. Wan, do you have anything to add? So nothing to add on this point. I also agree with what Professor Zhang Hua said.
So we have Sam Linson who just raised your questions in the Q&A box here. Sam, would you like to address your question directly to Dr. Wan, just in case I didn't express it accurately? Please briefly introduce yourself before posing the question. Thank you. And also keep your question short. Thanks.
All right, and many thanks for letting me taking part in this seminar. I hope I'm clear to everyone.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Oh, great. Yeah, so indeed, my name is Sam Linson, and I'm actually based in China with a vested interest in the microbiome, hence my questions. I am developing microbial soil health and monitoring solutions, and that's why I also participate in this symposium. And indeed, very intrigued by the first presentation this evening of Dr. Wan. And just looking at the numbers, indeed, I know about Phytoremediation, and things have also been discussed in the later presentations. But this holistic system of plants, being able to attract the biodiversity of the soil back into the contaminated soil, in combination with the fact that indeed only 50% after 5 years of this arsenic was removed in these fields, made me think that there's this other factor in this black box that actually caused the situation to improve. And if that could be because of the restoration of the microbiome, or the biome, let's say in general, of the soil, this is it will be interesting to also pinpoint attention to this, because it may play an equally important role, and therefore I indeed asked the question, like, has this been studied over time, and did the microbiome indeed, the biodiversity indeed improve over time in these plots that were studied?
Thank you, Sam. Dr. Wan, do you want to reply to that question? I'm not sure. Do you understand the question clearly? Do you prefer Sam to reframe it, just in case?
I don't quite get it. 他是说 微生物嘛，他还是问的微生物
So
的问题。
are you still talking about microbial?
Sam, actually, can you reframe your question just in one sentence?
Yes. So is part of the improvement that was seen, can part of the improvement that was seen in this field after 5 years be attributed to the restoration of the microbiome in the field, together with the phyto-extraction of the arsenic? So was this a combined success based on the combined issue of extraction plus the microbiome restoration? Or was it really only attributed to the extraction of the arsenic?
Okay, Sam, thank you. 万博士，如果我理解准确的话
Dr. Wan, if my understanding is correct, he wants to understand that within these 5 years, within this normal time frame, the arsenic absorption performance, what is it like? And then how about these? Are there any co-benefits for the microbial?
Your question, Sam just asked. Dr. Wan, would you like to answer?
好的，我们做了就是5年的，然后
So actually, we did this 5 years, and also some experiment longer than 5 years. So basically, in the first year, second year, and the third year, they have a quite stable performance. So 8% to 12%. And of extraction. And if you have other technical strategies, sometimes it might be higher than 12%. But usually after 3 years' time, the efficiency will be reducing slowly. And maybe in the soil, the arsenic effectiveness actually has been reduced. Even if these plants can really activate these arsenic, the speed will slow down. So usually, for this extraction, we actually try to shorten the remediation period to 3 years time frame. So this will be a more proper timeline. In terms of the microbial, we have also done some studies. So these are microbial, these are microorganisms also play the same role, equally important role, because arsenic, we have arsenic 3, arsenic 6, and some actually converted, the forms of the arsenic might be converted in an interface between plant and soil. So we can actually, these microbial can help the plants to absorb the arsenic better or faster.
And I actually have a question for all the panelists. But meanwhile, the audience and attendees, if you have any questions, please please share with us in the Q&A box. So my question for all the panelists are: is there just a luck, let's say, to, like, for example, for Dr. Wan, the Professor Zhang, to identify certain plants that can be used, can be applied to soil remediation? And in the case of Peterson, Mr. Peterson, you identified your own approach. Is that based on luck to test which solutions might work? Because when it comes to nature-based solution, there's just so many possibilities out there compared to physical and chemical processes. And if that's luck, what can we do to emphasize to make sure that we can actually look out and get more potential, solutions that can be scaled up, that has a lower cost, that can help us solve the problems that we're facing today? Who wants to start? I just maybe go to Mr. Peterson. Would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, it's quite interesting question, because when it comes to, for instance, this biochar, it will not only be able to bind the contaminants in the soil, but slightly depending on the soil type as well, it will kind of add benefit to the plants growing there. And we have seen tests done in cornfields, and we have seen how the crop can improve quite a lot. I think the yield was more than doubled, for instance, by just adding the biochar, but that depends a bit on the soil quality. So I think you, as a beginning, you really have to kind of study the problem and see, okay, what is the level of contamination? What kind of species do we have here? How is the soil quality? What kind of natural mechanisms are at work in this area? And then you can start tailor making together the best kind of the best total recipe for restoring the area. Because there also, I think there is a risk that if you just copy what was done in a different project, you might end up that your kind of your case is so much more different that it will actually not work there at all. So I think that first phase really needs a lot of competence and a lot of knowledge to the topic and to get the best starting point. Yeah, thanks.
Professor Freyberg, would you like to make a few more comments on that?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think that we need to work by chance. I think what we see here is quite, it's based on a lot of skills and knowledge, and we know quite a lot of, we actually know a lot of, like say, plant traits and properties of plants, if that's the example, that have been used or developed in other circumstances, or maybe as describing for in ecological research. And this knowledge can be quite readily transferred to try and shortlist which organism would actually be able to do the job. So we can, I mean, we actually have a good starting point, but often, you know, it's haven't been used in this way because you consider this as a separate disciplines. So I don't think we need to start from scratch or by chance, and this has clearly not been the case in what we see here, but there's often a lot of added benefits to what we already know. So we can we should always direct our questions towards what we really want to achieve in the end, and from that state, I think we can be able to use, as I said in my talk, we can let nature do the work to a much larger extent than what's now is the case. And I think we see this in all the presentations today, that there's a lot of potential, and some of it is actually something you wouldn't have seen when you started out. But that's not the same that you're just starting without any idea of where to go. So it's hypothesis-driven science as always, and I think this is very important. But we need this merger of people coming from different parts of science, so from engineering, from analytical chemistry, from ecology, and sort of try and make these sort of hubs where you address real questions and challenges, and try and use this multi-perspective. And then I think it would be highly interesting, and I really hope, as I said, that in the coming decade that we will have much more emphasis on joining the technical science with the more sort of biological, ecological sciences to try and develop these solutions. Then it will not be by chance, I think. Then it would be really directed towards solutions.
Before I turn the microphone to Professor Zhang Hua and Dr. Wan, I just want to emphasize the point you just make about, you know, the knowledge transfer from science to policy to solutions. And I think that's really what we're seeking here, to unsilo different discussions, you know, from the government side, from scientists, from policymakers, but also, you know, there's so many stakeholders involved, and there's so many potential solutions that can be applied to solving soil contamination, and I mean to remediate as well. Professor Zhang, do you want to make it? Do you have any remarks in relating to the last question I just asked about, you know, being lucky and doing hard science. 张教授，你有什么评论吗？就是关于刚刚我提的这个问题。
Professor Zhang, do you have any comments about the question I raised?
I think Professor Zhang is probably muted. Maybe I'll just turn to Dr. Wan. 万博士，您觉得呢？就是您刚刚提到的这个
Dr. Wan, you mentioned that you have over 20 pilot projects, and your technologies have been developing for many years. Do you think that you are lucky enough to have identified those plants? Is it pure luck, or are there any other factors that have enabled you to figure out those solutions? And any suggestions about how to figure out more solutions? Thank you for the question. Of course, we need luck, but in addition to luck, we need scientific methods to identify the solutions. Our team has been working really hard to discover those solutions, and it was not an even road. It was full of ups and downs. And of course, in the future, we will be standing on the shoulders of the giants because we will have more experience. And for the plants we identified, such as the P. vittata, before we discovered Pteris vittata, our team already figured out some areas where there could be some plants that can accumulate those heavy metals. Our team followed our scientific zoning of the areas where there is a potential Pteris vittata. We analyzed the productivity and output of Pteris vittata, and we collected samples. It took us a long time for us to identify the Pteris vittata and also utilize it in remediation of contaminated soil. And of course, we need to develop more advanced and more reliable technologies, and more people will have to work towards the development of those technologies. Dr. Wang, there is a question about how to avoid secondary contamination from the absorption and process and the processing of the plants, how to avoid secondary contamination. Yes, the treatment of biomass that has a lot of accumulation of arsenic, this is a frequently asked question. And in July and August, we have one harvest, and in around October, we have the second harvest of the vittata. We harvest the Pteris vittata and dry them, and then burn them. If they are wet, it would be difficult to burn them. So we collect them and put them in some designated areas, and we burn those arsenic accumulating Pteris vittata. So the major treatment of Pteris vittata is to burn them. And the Pteris vittata is a traditional Chinese herb. So we are trying to identify other economic values of this grass, Pteris vittata. Thank you, Dr. Wan.
Time is ticking, and we have about 10 minutes left. And I just want to pose one last final question to all the speakers. I mean, if welcome to address to share with your comments on this point. I still want to pick up the point that Dr. Wan shared in her presentation about community, about the involvement of community. Nature-based solutions, as I've heard, as I've seen, always involve community members, because they are really on the frontier of protecting nature, and they are also the first victims of whatever pollutions, contaminations, and the health risk that we're talking about that would happen to them. How can we bridge the gap between, let's say, policy making, community engagement, and also the industry participation? How do we put together all the factors to make sure that we can create towards success? Let's say, let me put it this way. 万博士，你要先发言吗？因为这个
Dr. Wang, do you want to speak first because this is related to what you said just now? Yes, this is a very important question. In the whole working process, we met other stakeholders at the beginning. Some stakeholders might not be so cooperative. I think community and stakeholder engagement is a long-term process. In some regions and places, there is higher acceptance by local communities and local stakeholders. The local farmers were highly cooperative and collaborative, and everything went smoothly. Their plants grew very well, but some stakeholders didn't buy us. And we had to keep telling them that your plants are not safe or not healthy. We need to engage local governments, experts, and the farmers to make our projects a great success. Only by engaging all those stakeholders, we can increase the income of local farmers and increase the success of our projects. So all those stakeholders must work together. Mr. Peterson?
Mr. Peterson, you have some remarks to make, right?
There you go. Yeah, I think it's a really important aspect, how to bridge the gap, because one thing is on the communication level. For instance, from a scientific point of view, we can see that this is a really positive solution, but then maybe the local population doesn't understand the solution at all, and actually get to be opponents to it. They don't like it because they don't understand it, and that can be. So we really have to focus on how we are communicating, and to communicate advanced science. That is not too easy. Just a small example is that if a scientist have a table with numbers, that is often extremely clear to the scientist, but a lot of other people, they're not able to read a table at all. It's just a wall of strange numbers. So to communicate and to really take care of that, that is a key, I think, to bridge the gaps. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Zhang Hua, do you have any comments on that? Bridging the community knowledge, the science. Yes, we can hear you.
刚刚没有声音，现在可以听见吗？
现在可以
Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Thank you. The moderator and the panelists talked about management and the operational factors. I have similar observations. I think the most important driving force for soil remediation is government, because we have a public fund. A lot of financial resources are from the government. And of course, we need local public support. When we design the macro implementation plan, we have to get it aligned with the government plans. And finally, we have to meet the requests of local people for soil. And of course, the local people are interested in their own interests. In sustainable soil remediation, first of all, we shall not hurt the interests of local people. In fact, those community people, the local people, are very enthusiastic about soil remediation if their interests are protected. And many of our models and the paradigms that can help local people increase their income, and we can create some win-win effects among the local communities and the government and the industry. But we need to engage the business community. For example, to give you an example, the phytoremediation technology involves a cost. We need to get financial resources. There must be a closed loop for the circulation and utilization of capsule. For example, on the farmland, a lot of corns are planted, and the corns are not so economically valuable. The local farmers may not have a high income, but they plant lots of corn. In those soils that are above national limits, we plant a corn, and a corn can be converted into some silage and feed. So we can turn the corn into silage, into feed, and the residues of corns can also be utilized. So we can combine all those technologies together to create a win-win situation.
We're very close to the end of the session. Before I turn the mic to Professor Freiberg, dear participants, our colleague have just shared with you a link to evaluate the session. Any comments, response are welcomed. Please help us to improve our future sessions. And now I will turn to Professor Freiberg, please.
Yes, I think that the whole issue about stakeholder engagement is really important and key to actually solve all these problems and issues. And I would also say one thing is communication, but another thing is what we're trying to do now with the nature-based solutions that we are working on is trying to be more in a co-creation process. That is, that we get the stakeholders on board in the beginning of our science project to be able to select between solutions and also be able to direct the science to some degree, even though, of course, they would not have the sort of insights into the finer details of the science. They would still be able to help us to prioritize. So they get a stake in the process early on, and I think that would help immensely for the implementation. And among the stakeholders is, of course, local, as we talked about, that there could be local people, like in this case, is also farmers and NGOs related to the use of nature, but it would also be representatives from the various sort of authorities that are actually working on the different issues. So co-creation, I think, will also be a big asset in future in getting uptake for what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to close the panel and thank you all for your excellent presentation and discussion. And dear participants, we're going to have a third session tomorrow at the same time on finance, which is really the core issue. We move slowly from governance to technology and industry, and finally to the core, how to finance the great solutions that are available, that are presented today, and to mobilize not just a public finance, but also private finance for future soil remediation projects in China and beyond. And do join us tomorrow and spread the word, invite your colleagues. We have a great lineup of speakers tomorrow from, for example, State Council's Development Research Center, from East China Norwegian University, from Norwegian Institute of Water Research, and the US Environmental Protection Agency. And please rejoin us, and I know we can't really, you can't really hear my applause, but I'm going to do it. Thank you everyone for your participation and sharing the knowledge, and fill the survey for us so we can improve. Thank you very much. And I will just say, that's the end of the session. See you around. Have a good day, all of you. Thank you very much.